90% of diamonds are manufactured in India, so cut and polished in India. That's not going to change in the near term. So a lot of this price increase will get passed on to the U.S. consumer.
As expected, the White House has announced an increase on duties to Canadian softwood lumber.
In August, the United States government imposed some of the steepest tariffs in recent history, duties reaching 50% on Indian goods and more 35% on Canadian softwood lumber. The impact was immediate. Jewelry that once symbolized love and commitment suddenly became far more expensive.
About 55% of Indian exports to the U.S. are expected to take a hit from tariffs imposed by the Trump administration.
The cost of building a single-family home rose by an average of $6,000. For many families, that difference is the breaking point between possibility and impossibility. And economists warn these are only the first signs of what lies ahead. Since the beginning of the month, the Trump administration has pressed forward with a sweeping wave of trade measures targeting more than 60 countries. The official explanation is leverage, tools to secure better trade agreements for the United States.
But a lot of companies have signaled that price hikes aren't how might this all look in a real person's life.
But behind the political framing, the costs are being felt by ordinary Americans in very real ways. Two industries illustrate the story most clearly: diamonds from India and lumber from Canada. India remains the beating heart of the global diamond industry, cutting and polishing around 90% of the world's supply. From New York's Diamond District to jewelry counters across California, most diamonds sold in the U.S. trace back to Indian craftsmanship. For years, tariffs on Indian goods hovered at 25%. It was high, but jewelers and suppliers managed to balance the burden, keeping demand alive. When tariffs doubled to 50%, the system cracked. Retailers could no longer split the costs, and prices began climbing overnight. The timing could not be worse. Gold, already trading at record highs, has doubled compared to just a few years ago. Together, these forces are pushing engagement rings and fine jewelry further out of reach for middle-class Americans. The holiday season, usually the most profitable time for jewelers, is now clouded by uncertainty. Some wealthier buyers are traveling overseas to make purchases where tariffs don't apply. But for most, scaling back or turning to lab-grown diamonds is the only option. For an industry built on tradition, this is one of the sharpest disruptions in decades. Housing tells a similar story, only with even higher stakes. Washington's decision to double certain duties on Canadian softwood lumber has driven total tariffs above 35%. On paper, it looks like a percentage. In practice, it adds an average of $6,000 to the cost of constructing a single-family home. For a young couple saving every dollar to build their first house, $6,000 is not just a statistic, it is devastating. Canadian officials have warned repeatedly that the hardest-hit groups will be first-time buyers and families rebuilding after disasters such as wildfires and hurricanes. Ottawa is not standing still. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has rolled out a $1.22 billion Canadian dollar support package, including $700 million in loan guarantees to keep mills running and $500 million to help industries diversify toward European and Asian markets. Canada is building a buffer. In the United States, families are absorbing the costs. And this is only part of a much larger picture. On August 7th, U.S. Customs and Border Protection began collecting tariffs ranging from 10 to 50% on imports from more than 60 nations. Brazil faces a 50% duty, Switzerland 39%, Laos and Myanmar 40%. Even close allies like Japan, South Korea, and the European Union are caught in the net, facing 15% rates under newly renegotiated agreements. The United Kingdom post-Brexit now pays 10%. Technology is next on the list. The administration has signaled the possibility of a 100% tariff on foreign-made computer chips. Exemptions are promised only for companies willing to invest in U.S. production. Apple, in response, pledged a $100 billion U.S. investment. The proposed tariff is not yet finalized, but the warning shot has been fired. The White House presents these tariffs as revenue, President Trump himself posted that billions of dollars are flowing into the United States. But economists caution against this interpretation. Tariffs are not paid by foreign governments. They are collected from U.S. importers, who in turn raise their prices. In the end, it is American consumers who carry the burden. Research from the Yale Budget Lab estimates that the 2025 tariff package will add an average of $2,400 in costs per household each year. That amount represents groceries, tuition, or mortgage payments quietly disappearing under the weight of higher prices. Already, June's Consumer Price Index shows costs rising for clothing, appliances, and furniture. Essentials are being pulled into the same storm. The ripple effects extend well beyond North America. India faces higher duties linked to its continued purchases of Russian oil. In South Africa, officials warn of looming job losses as U.S. tariffs erase past advantages and force industries into thinner margin markets across Asia and the Middle East. In Europe and Asia, governments are bracing for retaliation, raising fears of an escalating trade conflict. What began as a strategy to protect American jobs is now reshaping global trade in ways that are unpredictable and potentially damaging. For consumers, the effect is clear: higher prices, fewer options, and greater uncertainty. For industries, the challenge is survival in an increasingly unstable market. From diamonds to lumber, from electronics to clothing, tariffs are no longer distant policy decisions debated in Washington. They are reshaping the daily lives of Americans, altering how much families pay for luxuries and necessities alike. The central question now is whether these measures will strengthen the United States economy in the long run, or whether they will leave households paying more while trading partners adapt and move forward. In the next phase, we will explore the political gamble behind these tariffs, the industries most at risk, and the consequences for America's position in the global economy. The takeaway for Ottawa is clear. Countries everywhere are racing to reroute exports, and Canada's own diversification must move quickly and stay disciplined. Already, Ontario's grain shipments are shifting to Europe, evidence that the adjustment is underway. But the urgency has sharpened. Last Friday, President Trump increased tariffs on Canadian goods by 35%. Since August 1st, Canada has been under new pressure as tariffs on non-USMCA goods locked in. On paper, over 85% of bilateral trade between Canada and the United States remains tariff-free. But for targeted sectors, softwood lumber, steel, aluminum, and key manufactured products, the hit is severe. Some exporters are adapting. Ontario is both a grain buyer and a grain seller. The province imports massive volumes of U.S. grain, supporting farmers in as many as 40 American states, while exporting Canadian crops abroad. Now, with Trump's new tariffs, some of Ontario's exports are being diverted away from the United States and redirected to Europe. That may help diversify Canadian markets, but it risks cutting U.S. farmers off from one of their largest and most reliable buyers. The political response has been cautious. Prime Minister Mark Carney, after a closed-door cabinet meeting with premiers, urged keeping channels with Washington open while shielding domestic industries from harm. He signaled a willingness to remove some Canadian counter-tariffs if doing so protects critical sectors. But the provinces are divided. Ontario's Doug Ford supports a firm tariff-for-tariff approach, warning against trusting Trump's terms. Saskatchewan's Scott Moe favors reducing retaliation to ease costs for Canadian families. Trade experts recommend a middle path, keeping counter-tariffs as leverage, but avoiding escalation that could spiral. Meanwhile, industrial projects are caught in the crossfire. Volkswagen's $7 billion battery plant in St. Thomas is moving forward, but procurement delays are slowing projects elsewhere. In Amherstburg, the fire chief points to higher costs and a 3-year wait for a U.S.-made fire truck as tariffs ripple through supply chains. the uncertainty is deepening. Washington has threatened a 100% tariff on foreign-made computer chips, a move that could redefine entire industries. For Canada, the challenge is balancing retaliation with survival. Each decision carries weight, not only for markets but for Canada's position in a shifting global order. South of the border, the picture is even more volatile. Brazil has been slapped with the steepest tariff yet, 50% on all exports to the U.S., up from just 10% announced earlier this year. Trump framed the escalation as retaliation for what he called political persecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Brazil's current leader, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, dismissed the measure as blatant political interference and authorized immediate counter-tariffs on U.S. goods. Economically, Brazil can withstand the blow. Only 12% of its exports go to the U.S., but diplomatically, the damage is real. Brasilia is now moving closer to BRICS partners and Asian markets, a shift that could accelerate a broader realignment. Colombia, too, is breaking away. After allegations tied U.S. figures to a political plot, Trump recalled the American ambassador and threatened to revoke Colombia's drug cooperation certification. But instead of backing down, President Gustavo Petro has leaned harder into BRICS partnerships, openly courting development financing outside of Washington's reach. Across Latin America, the pattern is unmistakable. Once dependent partners are diversifying, insulating themselves from U.S. leverage, and forming new alliances. Trump's tariffs were meant to tighten America's grip. Instead, they are driving neighbors closer to each other and further from Washington. For Canada, the stakes are immediate. Carney's government must choose between retaliation and restraint, between short-term protection and long-term diversification. For Mexico, the path is alignment, strengthening bilateral ties with Ottawa to withstand U.S. pressure. And for Brazil and Colombia, the tariffs are accelerating an irreversible pivot toward alternative global networks. What began as a strategy to demonstrate power is showing signs of unraveling. America's closest allies are learning to move without it. Partners who once bent under U.S. pressure are now banding together. And supply chains, once routed through American ports, are increasingly bypassing them. The United States still holds enormous economic weight, but the trust underpinning that influence is fracturing. In the short term, tariffs may boost political optics at home, but in the long run, they risk breaking not just supply lines, but relationships built over decades. The question now is whether Washington can recalibrate before the costs outweigh the leverage. And that brings us to the end of this story, for now. But the trade war is far from over. In the coming weeks, new tariffs may be announced, new alliances may form, and the balance of global trade may shift again. Thanks for watching. If you want to stay updated on the latest global news and shocking stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the New World Times and hit the notification bell. Don't miss out on the news that really matters.